So in this case, we have a sub-layout here. We have this, I call it a featurette. It's a heading and some text. One of the things is and so that is actually configured on the sub-layout itself as well. So in this case, there's a when you're configuring these, you need to take into account what is the data source template. Something else. So in this case, I've got a right one and a left one. But we could go a little deeper than that. One of the things that that I'm not real fond of is having all of these like massive folders in a metadata library on kind of underneath your site root. So like you have the slide in there, not close. Basically, the slides are global. Some of these data sources are very particular to a particular page, and you're not going to share sites. So one of the things that might not create a little bit of then another thing about previous editing had the layout actually and a lot of times the biggest example of that was the slide carousel. In editing, and we do that in the flow. We actually this our agent, and if so, we actually render a little bit. Actually putting an actual there or something. So this slides will actually render as a slideshow. Another common place to see this is on a tab control. So if we have a tab layout down, so basically and I was going to go into this now and try to put it together, but basically you have a tab where you have something that's in there. When you go to edit that, a lot of times you may not be able to actually click on those tabs. And so I've done in the past to basically stack all those tabs on top of each other. So the page becomes really long, but then content editors can actually get all their content and still kind of see it in it and let you see what you get. So go back and look at the demo. So in this case, I'm going to insert another one of these featurettes. So I'm going to add it underneath this one. In this case, I'm going to do a left-hand one. And now you see it's when you're inserted in a red folder called featurettes. So let's just create a new one and call it featurette left. So now in this case, here's an image rendered. Yeah, it's a field vendor for an image. So in this case, we can go pick an image. I've got this picture of my friend Kevin. Now if I preview this, now I've got these two featurettes now. So where did it actually create that? That folder lives underneath this page. And in this case, I've created it so that we look at what is this actual folder. It's a template I've defined called content folder. And so it's a folder that I'm going to use to store kind of all my content items for this page. And so how did that actually get created? If I look at what all that folder is, if I look at a template for it, it's actually it's a template based on a folder that I changed the icon. So, and typically we'll do this to differentiate from normal folders, so we know like a red folder or a blue folder actually contains content.
Here. Yeah. So with this approach, does that impact search in any kind of way? Or do you generally exclude these from search?
No. And it depends on which version of Cycler you're using. In Cycler 7, and I'll kind of talk about this at the end, items that you add, data sources that you add to presentation details, whether you do it read on the content editor and set the data source that way or the page editor, those links are actually defined, are actually stored in the link database, and then when indexing comes through, we will actually index that item, all the data source items along with that page. So if there's a piece of text on one of these feature, if I search, in the case of this one, if I search for the phrase Kevin, it will be actually associated with the content item, the page item itself.
So it would be the same as a folder.
Correct.
You might need a little enhancement to the search to get that to work.
Sure.
It's posted on someone's blog.
Nick might have a way of making that work. We definitely ran into it with Cycler 6. If you use something like an advanced database crawler, you end up having to, while it's crawling, go and find all the actual content items. It's really not that difficult. You're adding to the underscore content field within the index all the content from these content items. So again, if that folder already existed, but in the case of this one, I'm going to add another feature. In this case, I don't have any because this page didn't have any to begin with, so I'm going to have to create a whole new one. And oftentimes, you're not sharing as much content across these pages. And that's just so. Really quick. If I go back and actually refresh this tree, see the content actually has one of these feature add folders now. So if I look at the data source location that I've defined on both the feature, it's the same as on feature at left and right have the same. I've actually set it to be relative, so I say /featureats. And then I set the data source. But that's not kind of all that needs to get done. And actually, to create that folder, we need to hook into a pipeline within Sitecore. And the name is the get rendering data source pipeline. So when you're actually getting the data source for rendering, this pipeline fires. In this case, we're patching in my create folder class. So what goes on in here is we're going to look for a parameter off of the rendering, in this case called content folder template. Do some checks to make sure it doesn't exist. That's actually a relative path. And then in the end, what we end up doing is we add a new context item underneath the item of the type of the content. So that this actual parameter, this rendering item parameter, this data source location. That's not what it is. The parameter, we define that also on here. This is a little kludgy because it's a free-form field, so it's kind of a magic string. But you set In this case, I have content folder template, and I set it equal to the ID of that content folder. So in this case, basically, it's going to create that content folder underneath the item, and then put my data sources in there. If you set your data source locations, in this case, I only have one sub-layout that actually inserts items into there. But the same thing with you have a tab component, and you can put 5 different types of tab pages. Maybe you have a 2-column layout for a tab, you have a single column layout, one that's like an image-heavy one. You have like 3 different tab sub-layouts that you can actually insert into a placeholder. You might want to separate them, so you may create a folder for tabs. And maybe you have another component that's like an accordion. And so you can have different accordion fields that you can insert. And maybe those accordions are a list of PDFs to download, or an accordion that's got 2 columns of text or an image and some copy. You may put those into an accordions folder. So basically, it just helps people kind of follow, kind of know where content is. So finally, the other part I kind of mentioned in the advanced topics, go back into the code, is how do we determine that we're actually in the page editor? So if we look at the carousel, there's 2 different ways. In this case, if you look at the code we had in this, I'm actually using Glass Mapper. This uses Glass user control. You pass in a type for your model. I'm not going to get into Glass, but it's a way of actually modeling strongly typed items coming out of Site4, so you can actually utilize strongly typed items. So in this case, slide, I've got a class here that's decorated with some items. And basically, I get the ID, the title comes out of the Site4 field. I map, in this case, the slide image to a field name called slide space image. And then I can pass that in this case, I'm passing a page item in. So, kind of the magic of how I get those slides to stack on top of each other is right on the context. There's a page mode property, and basically it's a boolean that says, is this the page editor? If you actually look at that page mode, if you have a need, there's a bunch of other, are you in the page editor or editing? Are you in preview? So if you want to render something differently in preview than you would on the live site, built into the Glass user control, we have a simpler property that's basically just is in editing. And again, what I'm doing in this case is I've wrapped the slide controls themselves, the previous and next. They don't really make sense while we're editing, because you're not going to be able to actually advance the slides. So that's what's going on there. So it's kind of as you.
So Derek, you're basically changing the CSS class in editing mode?
Yeah, I guess that's what pointed out. So in this case, I am changing the CSS class, and I'm appending another class onto it called edit, which in the case of that, in this case, I set the display block and I put a margin around it just so that the slides aren't full width. They kind of stand out a little bit and they have a little bit of space.
So overall, the developer has full control what he wants to show as a page editor on the page.
Yeah, so that's one of the things as a developer to think of is what is the content author going to see when they go to edit this page? What is the experience for adding components? So that's where you have control over your placeholder settings, which that way they're not adding components that don't belong in a certain spot. So only items that, if you had a kind of classic 2-column layout like right or left rail in a main content area, they can only add things that make sense to the rail placeholder.
Is there any reason why you went with web forms?
Cover. All of this is available via MVC as well. I was just trying to like a website and more comfortable with web forms. You'll kind of see my code style is to follow more of the script tag. What do they call this? I used to use instead of using a lot of server controls, you have kind of a thing for that. Scriptlets, what is the like percent tags? Yeah, so I typically follow that in lieu of like if I have a list, I'm still using web forms of computer on there. So I don't have to write it on IMD or on the and it's very simple to just do a for each to flash in there. So what are some of the challenges? Cloning. I don't know if you're using cloning at any of your sites, but it allows you to copy an item. So instead of actually copying it, it makes a clone of it. And if you edit anything, and by default, all the fields are blank. And so a blank field says, pull this value from the source item that I cloned it from. And so one of the things is, and this is at the bottom here, is all of these you know, the presentation details that we may be used to working with in, we're doing mainly content editor stuff. All of this is stored in a system field called __ renderings. And so when this item is cloned, that field is going to be blank, and it's going to actually refer to the data source items back on that original source item. So if we, in the case of our page where we had those featurettes, if we were to clone that page, all the data source, and open up the presentation detail, the data sources, you will clone the content item. So you'll see that featurette folder come down, you'll see the left and right ones, any contents that come down. But if you look at the presentation details, the data sources refer back to the original item. And so if I can show that. So let's say I want to clone this about item. I'm just going to put it straight at the home page. So now I have this copy of about, and it actually cloned all of my items down here. But if I open the presentation details, this is still referring to data sources, not the about content. So that's something to keep in mind. We got around it in a particular situation with a module from Alex Shiva called Power Item Cloning. I don't know if it ever saw the light of day, but basically it hooks into the cloning process after it actually goes back and remaps all those data source fields. The other challenge is you may end up with a bunch of orphans. And so what I mean by that is if I'm in this about page, and I decide I don't want this anymore, so I'm going to delete it. Great, okay, so straight, publish it, we're all good to go. That item is still there. It's just not wired up to any data sources. So if you have a lot of content sharing, you could end up with a lot of orphan items out there. Ways you could get around this is looking at, since all of these are actually in the links database, you can look and see, are there items out there that aren't linked anymore? Have they, what's their age? You could write a scheduled task to clean those out.
So it's not a guidelines required for content editor, we can split it out to create it out.
Say that again?
It's not a guidelines required for content editor, we can set up some scheduler or some kind of task to clean it out.
Right. The biggest thing is you want to make sure that it's not linked somewhere, that you're not deleting something that's a data source or something that's actually used.
So the cleaning of output can be done by content editor or by technical?
It could. I mean, they could go into the content editor and actually delete that item directly. You kind of have to know that that linkage exists.
You could do an item saves handler too to do it, but that could be kind of dangerous if the users accidentally removes the component.
Right. That's another challenge too. I mean, we have a site where they change their content quite a bit. A lot of times maybe they have a tab that they don't want there anymore, but like a couple versions down the road, they might have that tab back.
Yeah.
So when they get that add new data source, they can pick one of the existing ones, and maybe it's not currently used, but they can add that in. The other challenge you run into with renderings being a shared field is it's shared across languages. So if you go in and actually, if you insert a, in this case, a featurette, that's going to appear in all languages. And you may not necessarily have done the translation for the content language. So you kind of have to, ways to get around that. I can say with authority that Sitecore will support it if you go in behind the scenes and change that to an unshared field. So now they're language-specific renderings. You'll probably want to do that in conjunction with something like partial language fallback, so that if you don't specify any renderings, at least they will fall back to the renderings in a default language. It's kind of an advanced thing to do, but it's something to be aware of. And then the other one, and I think it's time to put together a presentation on it, if you get a chance, Nick's got a good kind of screencast on this, is I had a carousel with a placeholder called carousel slides. I can only have one of those placeholders on there. Because if I were to insert another item, say another carousel, so I have two sets of carousels, and we'll forget about the user experience implications of that. But now I insert slides into the second carousel. Its placeholder is called carousel slides. Sitecore doesn't know which one of those placeholders to put it into, and in most cases it will just default to the first one. So your page editor experience might be great. You have the 4 slides in the first carousel, 4 slides in the second one. You save it, you launch it, now there's 8 slides in the first one and none in the second. So it's something to be aware of. We worked around it by doing what are called dynamic placeholders, so we actually name the placeholders on the fly. And again, I point you towards Nick. If you look on his blog, he's got a really great write-up on how to do that. Some considerations if you're still working on Sitecore 6. Data sources in Sitecore 7 are actually stored as a GUID. So they're actually stored as an ID of an item. If you move that data source around, you're golden. In Sitecore 6, they are not. They're stored as an internal link field, and it's actually stored as a text pad. And the challenge, where that really becomes, is you're probably not going to move the data sources around, but if you move your page around, now that path isn't valid anymore. So now, the about page is now underneath the contact us page. So instead of the data source being Sitecore/content/ page editor /about/ featurettes, it actually should be about /contact us /featurettes. And so there is, if you're still working on Sitecore 6, there is a pipeline you can hook into and actually on a save event replace that internal link field with a GUID. It will rendering still work just fine. And the other challenge is in Sitecore 6, all those data sources are not stored in the links database. So if you want to do any sort of searching or you utilize the links database to actually look at what are all the associated items with this piece of content, they're not stored in there. They are in Sitecore 7, but not in Sitecore 6. And there's another post from, John West, on actually hooking into another pipeline to actually add these items to the links database if you're still on Sitecore 6. I can't recommend this document enough. It's probably the first time Sitecore's actually done documentation on actually using the page editor. A lot of times it's been several years of groping and a lot of reflector usage to figure out how it works. Now they actually have really good documentation. Go to SDM, this will be under documentation for Sitecore 7. A lot of what I covered in here is in here. It involves a lot of our information. And then all the sample code I have, I actually posted up on GitHub. Feel free to grab it. I can probably ignore pull requests, but if you want to check it out, kick the tires. I am using team development for Sitecore. I did include a solution that won't load the TDS projects if you want to look at You don't have team development for Cypher, you just want to look at the code projects. And that's about it. Is there any other questions?
You mentioned DMS, and you always work for DMS. Can you show?
Yeah, I guess I can do a little demo. Like, so what is this mean for DMS? So say this feature add. One of the items that I have analytics installed on here, you'll see this button that says create and edit the presentation, personalization options for this item. So in this case, what this does is set up a set of rules of what data source do I actually render into that item. So in this case, by default, we're going to render the data source we've chosen. But let's create a new condition. We'll call this one Canadians. And so let's set some conditions. So we're going to say where their GOIP country is equal to, in this case, Canada. So in this case, instead of the one feature add, we're going to use the other one. One of the things we could have said, maybe there's another condition that says, maybe these are all rules defined by DMS. Say if the current domain So in this case, if the current domain is equal to we're just going to completely hide this component, so don't display it. And so this set of rules that you get comes with DMS. You can tie into campaigns as a user activated a campaign that's being tracked in Cypher. So maybe you may want to, instead of, if you've got a promo item, you may want to highlight what you're trying to highlight in that campaign. A demo the active commerce people do is, if you come back as a return customer, so it's a link tag in the receipt email, you get put into a campaign that like this is a return customer. So there's promo banners that indicate, that basically target that return customer. You may set up profile cards on pages that say somebody's browsing information on a particular section of your site. If after a while they've triggered a certain level, we know people that view 5 or more pages in this section of our site are really strong targets that we want to target. Maybe we have a sub-layout that will pop up a mobile dialog asking for contact information. But we don't actually render that until they trigger that level. This is kind of where the power of and possibilities of DNS get exposed. The other thing you can do in this case is you can say, I want to test this. So you can do a couple of different variations. So I have variation number 1, this is right. And create a new one called left. No. What that would allow you to do is go into testing and actually start the test. And what it's doing here is just tracking engagement value. And so that's a TMS term where you kind of have to set up what is your engagement value, but you can look and see, if you want to do A/B testing, which generated the higher engagement value. So that's a good point.
So half the folks that visit your site would see the one version, and does the arrow work there? Can you flash to the left?
What's that?
Right next to the A?
So half are going to see that, and some will see that. And so it's going to switch between both of those two, track who does what via engagement score. This sort of thing, like I said, demos really well by Sitecore, but you have to build a site in order to use it.
So the overall page editor is helping DMS. That's what I can say.
Yes.
So what are the other business needs which can fulfill by page editor? If I am a business representative, how I should suggest that you could go for page editor feature? Like what business need will lead to the page editor feature enabled for the end user?
The one that we've used is changing a call, like for instance, a particular call to action. So like we'll model the text on a button, we'll use a data source. And then we can A/B test which call to action creates a larger response. Again, it's looking at and particularly like an e-commerce site that may also have a brick and mortar presence. If their brick and mortar presence is in the U.S., you can actually look at their GUIP and see, is this person actually local? So I'm going to feature, one of the things I may feature is my events calendar, things that's happening in store, as opposed to a feature on free shipping.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things you can, from a DMS personalization standpoint, a couple items you can use there.
Are you asking about the general business case for page editor though versus just DMS?
Yes.
I mean, the big thing, whether or not you're using DMS, in my mind, is the flexible page design.
Flexible.
Right. If you kind of do the anti-pattern that we call the page template, where you have a single Sitecore template that represents all the content on the page, then you have a static page. And if you want to change what's in the sidebar or change even the components on the page, someone's calling a developer. Whereas if you take a component-based approach where users can drop in these different items into different places on the page, then it becomes a much more flexible layout where business users can drop in different content items as needed, and developers can focus on creating components instead of page types.
Sure. So as this is going to be done by business user, we should suggest people that don't introduce page editor for a complex page. It should be a medium complex or simple page, or it's not really the need.
In Active Commerce, we use the page editor to set up the checkout page, which is the most complex page on the site. But that doesn't mean business users are in there every day adding and removing components. But
and that's a bad example too, because you guys are using Angular, so a lot of times you're putting Angular variables in there.
Sure.
So, but you can do really complex pages in the page editor and give your business users the flexibility to edit that page. So that, again, they're going to come out of the developer to change the paragraph. Come up with a different page.
So do we need to introduce any specific business user training if we introduce page editor?
Well, from a business user training standpoint, it's going to come down to how you train your content on the site. So in this case, it is a little bit more complex. So fill in all these fields. This field appears in this section of the on the page. If you have content editors that are used to kind of WordPress style, where here I've got a bunch of custom fields that fill out, and those fields that magically appear in the front end.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more training involved, but then showing them actually how you insert your component, how you configure that component, how you know how you choose from the existing component. There is a little bit more training for the content editors.
Yeah.
So that just is that comes with the territory. It's more flexibility.
You can totally just add it in the tree like you were before anyway.
Yeah, nothing's preventing them from going and editing the fields from the tree. It's just actually inserting components, and you don't have to go through the page editor. You go on presentation details. But I guarantee the page editor is going to be a lot easier for a business user to use than actually trying to navigate presentation.
in theory, the page editor, if you fully implemented it, should cut down on training needs. Is you instruct users to log in via page editor instead of by the content editor. And then they don't have this huge complicated ribbon and this form interface and this tree. They just browse the site, find the page they want to edit, switch to edit mode, make their changes, and save. However, I'd say in the majority of implementations that users are probably starting and then popping up in the page editor from there.
Have you run into any challenges in terms of acceptance of the page editor? Like, is it pretty
Typically, it's been customers that are used to using the content. So, like, if they're, say they've had a Sitecore site, they've had a Sitecore since 5, something, and they're used to, doing this stuff with a page editor really wasn't possible until about 6.4, and didn't get actually really usable until about 6.5. And so you have a lot of, people out there that are even on like 6.1, 6.2 sites. They're used to using the content. So, a lot of times they have to unlearn. Like, hey, I know I need to go to this place and edit this field, and my self-management appears. And so it's been a challenge if they're used to using Sitecore as a content editor in one way, and then actually train them actually how to use them.
People I've seen who are coming from other CMSs and come to it are usually pretty surprised at the flexibility they have. Maybe sometimes that's a bad thing. But like the idea that it's not just a page where they can just edit a few fields, that they can actually construct a page from components is usually, at least to have more, they need to have your basic browser skills, right? But it's usually kind of a relief or a surprise to them that they have that much flexibility.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. I think our next event we're planning for September. Topic to be determined. Maybe e-commerce and Sitecore. Did the insight lady? Or maybe some other topic. You guys tell us what you're looking for.
That's for you guys. So.
Please give feedback on the meetup page. Thank you.
If you guys have something you want us to present too, you definitely reach out to us. This isn't just us reaching.